Hello, dear listeners. I am Lepers, editorial coordinator of the Europe Ukraine desk, and I am returning for the last episode of the first season of our podcast, Covering Ukraine. This season gave you an opportunity to follow our first round of fellows. A dozen of them came from Ukraine, and another 18 came from 6 different countries in the European Union. Both cohorts traveled to meet each other in Ukraine and in the EU, and you listened to their feedback in the first 10 episodes of this podcast. Today, we close this series with one conversation around a singular story. The story of one of our Italian fellows, Davide Maria de Luca, whose life and career took an impressive turn thanks to our program. I invited him to share his choices in this podcast. The Europe Ukraine desk study visit in Kyiv, which he joined in 2023, led him to quit his permanent job at a prominent Italian media outlet and to relocate as a foreign freelance correspondent in Ukraine. So, hello, Davide.
Hello, Saralu.
So we're end of May 2024. I am in Paris in my apartment, and you are in Kyiv, right?
In my apartment, exactly.
Your apartment as well. So, Davide, we're gonna know everything about you in the rest of this podcast episode. And first of all, I would like you to introduce yourself so we know who you are and who we're listening to, please.
Very well. My name is Davide Maria de Luca. I am an Italian journalist. I have 15 years of experience writing about Italian politics and foreign affairs. And now I'm freelancing for a couple of Italian newspapers on the Swiss national Italian radio broadcaster. And since August last year, I've been living in Kyiv and doing reporting about the Ukrainian war and the cultural, economic and social situation here in Ukraine.
Thank you, Davide. So what is very interesting, I think, in your profile, and one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you today is that when I met you, it was in May 2023. We were in Kyiv. We met maybe on the train to Kyiv or in Kyiv. I don't know if we arrived together from Poland. And you were working for an Italian newspaper that we can name today. It's called Domani, right?
Exactly.
And can you maybe tell us how you arrived in Ukraine at that time? You were working at Domani. You had a very great position there. And how did you end up in Kyiv?
Yeah, I was a full-time reporter at the Domani newspaper. I was writing mainly about Italian politics, but since I was in that newspaper a kind of expert of the Ukrainian situation since the start of the war, also from sometimes before the start of the war, I was like the Ukrainian guy in the newspaper. I was writing about that situation from Italy, so it was mainly a desk job, basically. And as soon as the war started, I tried to get an assignment to come to Ukraine to make reporting from here. But my newspaper was pretty small. We didn't have a lot of money to spend in such a trip. And also we had like a very cautious culture in that newspaper. There was a lot of worry about securities issues and stuff like that. But when n-ost organized the trip you mentioned in May, it was an excellent opportunity because everything was very well organized. The newspaper, my editor-in-chief, looked at the project and said, "Oh, I like that. That doesn't sound very dangerous. That doesn't sound very expensive for us." And so I jumped on the opportunity and I joined you here in Kyiv for that very, very interesting week that we spent here in Kyiv. And for me, it was like an eye-opening experience from many different point of views. And after that experience, I came back in Italy. I thought about it for a couple of weeks, and then I decided that I wanted to come to Ukraine. I wanted to move to Ukraine and start reporting full time on what was going on here. And after a very short deliberation, I decided that the only way to do that was becoming a freelancer. So I basically quit my job, and in 2 or 3 months, I moved to Ukraine permanently.
And this is how you became a very important fellow for us, because EUD impacted a big change in your life.
Absolutely. I am very grateful to EUD. It was a choice that I do not regret.
Thanks for sharing this with us. Let's come back a little in the beginning of your story. So you said you were covering Ukraine from Italy. Had you ever been to Ukraine before?
Actually, no. I have been interested in Ukraine for a very long time, but I never had the opportunity to come here before. I remember that probably the first article I wrote about Ukraine was in winter 2013, at the beginning of the Maidan revolution. And it was an exciting story. It was very, very exciting. It was it was a revolution that was happening live, in front of our eyes. And I really wanted to come to Ukraine, but same story as 2 years ago. I was working for a very small newspaper. We didn't have the resources to send a journalist there. And when I managed to gather some resources to go myself, basically the revolution won. Yanukovych fled, and I made this big mistake thinking that everything was finished, that there was no story to report anymore. And so I started working on other stuff. And then, unfortunately, the annexation of Crimea happened. The war in Donbass started. And after that, 10 years after that, I always, in some way or another, kept in touch with Ukraine. In Italy, I followed this very prominent case that we had for 3 or 4 years, I think. It was a case, it was a trial. The Italian investigators they arrested a Ukrainian soldier, which was living in Italy, but was fighting in Donbass. He volunteered in the National Guard in 2014, and he was fighting in Donbass. And there he was involved in an accident in which an Italian journalist was killed. I'm talking about the name of the soldier was Vitaly Markiv, and the Italian journalist was Andy Rocchelli. And then this soldier was put under trial in Italy, and he was accused of murder, and it was a very prominent trial, very long. He was accused, then in appeal, he was freed, and I followed very closely, that case. But I never had the opportunity to come to Ukraine in all that period. And, I kept working on Italian politics and other stuff. I had the opportunity to travel around the world, but not in Ukraine until May last year.
So that's very interesting what you're saying, and also, so you're saying two very interesting things. What I hear is also how focused you were on Ukraine, even though you had not been there, and so how Ukraine has been in the news in the EU and in your case in Italy, although we didn't maybe know much about Ukraine, and although you never had an assignment to go there, it has been in the news for your whole career as a journalist.
Absolutely.
So it was a country that had big impact on your way of working. So that's one very interesting thing I think our listeners will be interested to know about Italy. The other thing is, and you can understand how people can be curious about it. How is it possible that a newspaper has an expert about Ukraine that has not been to Ukraine, or without sending him there? And I don't think it's only about Ukraine. It's about various places in the world where things happen. But how was it for you to be covering Ukraine regularly, I guess, at least since the start of full-scale invasion, but also before? How was it for you knowing that you had not been there and that you were writing articles about it?
It was not an ideal situation, to say the least. I think that the word expert is a very big word to describe such a situation. It's a case in which life gives you lemon, and so you make lemonade. It's a situation which is common everywhere, but I think especially in Italy, the resources for the media industry are dwindling, and so it's very difficult to have like proper expertise on topic. And so you happen to have, even for a European war, so an event which is extremely prominent, you happen to have people that are following that stories that have never been there, or don't speak the local languages, or don't have any kind of particular expertise on that place. I think that it's very common. And one day one is an Ukrainian expert, and the next day he is a Sudan expert, and the day after that is going to be a Myanmar expert. Unfortunately, that's the state of our industry now. And this is also one of the reasons why I decided to move here. I really wanted to focus on something. I really wanted to get a real expertise on at least one topic and be able to say something interesting and original, being based locally, and not like improvise, and as so often happens in our field.
Yeah, I can very much understand what you're saying. So you mentioned this trip. So you applied to be a fellow of the Europe-Ukraine desk. You were on board with us to join us for this first trip to Kyiv. It was in May 2023. And do you remember this week? It was 1 week. Can you tell us a bit the atmosphere and what you remember from this week, and also maybe highlights or like moments that struck you?
Well, I was extremely excited at that opportunity. I was finally visiting the country that I wrote so much about for so many years. And I had the impression that could be a professionally changing moment for me. And I think I was very lucky, because the trip was very well organized. It was an extremely interesting experience. But yeah, it's difficult to choose a single moment which was particularly relevant, because everything was very interesting. But I can name a couple of moments. I think it was very interesting, and it really gave me a sense of how vibrant and diverse is the Ukrainian civil society when we met these journalists from the national TV broadcaster here in Kyiv. And she was...
Suspilny.
Yeah, exactly. And she was speaking in a pretty critical way about how the government was managing communications in general. And I think someone, maybe it was me, asked her if what she was saying was on the record, off the record. And she thought for a second about it, and then she said, "Oh, it's on the record, of course. I'm not ashamed of what I'm saying. It's completely, I believe in that, and I'm totally open." And I was very surprised, because I think saying something like that, being so openly critical with your publisher, it's tough. It's tough also in a country like Italy, which is not in a war. It requires courage to criticize your publisher, criticize the government if you are basically working for the government. And she was doing that in a country which was a war. And it wasn't the only example. It was just maybe the most prominent of this really vibrant civil society in Ukraine. And this was one of the eye-opening moment of this trip. But also we talk with this with a guy who was one of the founder of an organization, NGO, that helps veterans. And he was very deep, very moving lecture, we can say. And he was talking basically about the consequences of the war. He said basically, if I remember correctly, he said, "I hope for the end of the war, but I am also very afraid of the end of the war, because I think that after the war, we are going to look at ourselves and look at the price that we pay to end this war, that is going to broke us a little bit. It's going to broke our back a little bit." And that also was pretty eye-opening, talking with someone who was really reflecting about what was going on. And that also helped me to give me this idea of a very plural society.
So coming to Ukraine allowed you to see that there are actually very different voices in Ukraine, and being in Ukraine made you see a much more diverse society. Is it what I understand?
Yes, exactly. And I have to say that living here reinforced even more this idea that we are talking about a diverse society, a complex society in which there are a lot of different people with different backgrounds, different culture, different social and economical condition, and many stories that are important and that deserve to be told.
Do you maybe remember one or two articles that you have published in the past months, or that you would not have been able to write if you had stayed in Italy?
Oh, absolutely. I had the opportunity to, 1 month ago, to visit a stabilization point. So the medical facility, the first medical facility where a soldier is being brought after being wounded on the field, near Chasiv Yar, which is one of the hottest, one of the most contested point on the front line right now. And I spent there one night, and I had the opportunity to see directly the dire situation in which some part of the Ukrainian army finds itself now, and especially this problem, the fact that the Ukrainian soldiers are quite old, over 40s generally, and then I had the opportunity to discuss with the medical personnel about what new problems this situation creates, how to deal. All the doctors in the history of armies in the past, they had to deal with 20 years old people. They had to treat those kind of people. And now they have to treat like middle-aged men. And this entails any kind of other problems apart from the wounds and the reason why they are brought to the doctors.
You mentioned it a little bit, but I wanted to know maybe if you can tell us a little more about what you learned or what you discovered now that you have lived a month in Ukraine. What can you say today that you...
Well, I think that one thing that I learned living here is that Ukraine is a very big country. It's very big. It's geographically big, but also very diverse. And it's an horizontal society, not in the sense that it's an equal society. We know that Ukraine is a very unequal society from an economic and social perspective, but it's horizontal in the sense that there is not just one city, one region, which is the center of the country, and all the rest is just orbiting around it. It's, in a way, it's similar to Italy. In Italy we have Rome, but we also have Milan, we also have Naples, we have Florence, and we have Bologna, and many cities who are like comparable. And Ukraine is similar. You have Kyiv, which is the capital, which is very important, but you also have Kharkiv, which was the cultural capital of Ukraine, was the city of universities and also the city of science and technology. And you have Lviv, the heart of the Ukrainianness, the old school nationalism and patriotism. And then you have Odessa, which is a very weird city, which a very strange history and very strange culture. But you also have Dnipro, and so on and so forth. And it's a very plural country and a very rich country from a diversity perspective. And this is something that when you write about Ukraine abroad, it's not so easy to grasp, especially now that we are in a war and in which all the voices try to sing together, to sing the same song. It's much more difficult to get this idea that there is the Ukrainian population probably has never been so united, also because it's under an external aggression, and this is a normal human reaction. But at the same time, under this choir, this compact choir, there are still a lot of different people with very different ideas and very different interpretation of what the future of Ukraine should be. And the other thing I discovered here is that, yes, the war is a very important thing to report about. It's a very important story and need to be told. But I'm also very, very, very curious about what will be of this country after the war, or after the hottest phase of the war. And I think that what is going to happen here in Ukraine, it's going to be a very important lesson for the rest of Europe, and probably also for the rest of the world. This is a very big war. This is a very traditional war. a conventional war, and we kind of forgot what happened to society during and after a conventional war. We saw in the last 20, 30, 40 years plenty of civil war, of failing states, and we kind of develop an expertise on how to talk about those kind of situation. But what about a society that has a giant, long, bloody conventional war? What happened to that society? What happens to that people after the war? And I discovered that I'm very curious about it. And so I hope to have the opportunity to stay here after the war, or at least after the hottest phase of the war, and see how things are going to develop here. I love this country. I hope for the best for this country, but I have to say right now I'm not too optimistic, unfortunately.
What do you think of the coverage of the war in EU media at the moment? And I'm kind of wondering if your opinion evolved with you living in Ukraine. Like, have you had a different point of view, developed a different point of view?
I think I can talk about Italian media in particular. That's the media scene I know the best. And also I think that if we talk about like the main European media, The Guardian, Le Monde, El País, I think that AAA newspaper did a pretty good coverage of what's going on. But if we talk about like more generally the media ecosphere, or in my case, the Italian media ecosphere, I think that the war in Ukraine has been a very tough challenge, and we, especially in Italy, we have not always be on top of it. And
can you be specific?
Yeah, sure. I think that the mainstream media, especially, they were like too extreme in both senses, in both ways. They were both sometimes too generous, too open to Russian arguments and Russian propaganda, and sometimes too blind and too naive when they talked about Ukraine. And the space in the middle, it was not empty, but was not so full of good articles and reporting as you would have hoped. And some specific examples, especially in Italy, we tended to talk about Ukraine through the prism of our internal political problems. And so, for example, Ukraine became a way for some parties, especially around the center, so center right and center left, to bash their enemies on the radical right and radical left. And so you had these kind of arguments in which they sounded like they were talking about Ukraine, but they weren't really talking about Ukraine. Maybe we spent a little too much time in like looking at Putinist and Russophiles and people like them and Russian propagandists, instead of finding the right arguments to persuade the Italian public that the Ukrainian cause is just and fair and needs support. Too much time talking about pro-Putin people instead of like underlining the argument that we are talking about a small nation which has been invaded by a much bigger neighbor. And so the moral argument is all in favor of the weaker part. And which is a very simple argument, very easy to understand to everybody, but I fear maybe not so often repeated. And now you are telling us that after Ukraine, Russia will invade Europe. But 6 months ago, you were saying that the Ukrainians would be in Crimea in 6 months, and that didn't happen. And so the skepticism grows, and that's basically the situation, I think.
We were talking about the Italian coverage. Now, I wanted to know if in a few months staying in Ukraine, you have a glimpse of how Ukrainian media cover the war, and maybe cover how people outside of Ukraine look at Ukraine. And I was wondering what you think of it. How is it represented in Ukrainian media?
I think that in Ukrainian media, you can find some real outstanding example of journalists, of bravery, of accuracy, of professionality. It's really incredible. And I'm basically learning something from my Ukrainian colleague every day, who are doing an incredible job under a situation which is unbelievably tough. I think that the media landscape in Ukraine, it's still very vibrant for a society which is in a war. And I have to say that the EUD helped me a lot in connecting with Ukrainian journalists. And he was very good at creating an environment in which those journalists felt very free to tell us what they really thought about what's going on. Because a part of this very outstanding example, the general situation, and that's what my Ukrainian colleague very often say, is not so good. Especially on TV, the TV networks are still pretty close and following very strictly a government lead. And this is a testament to the openness and the vibrancy of the Ukrainian society. The TV ratings of the official government networks are very low, and basically nobody is watching them anymore. And we still see a lot of investigative journalism and a lot of people still writing about corruption and scandals. And then this is another thing which is outstanding and incredible. You don't see anything like that in Russia, and I think it's very difficult to find the courage, the bravery to write about corruption in a country which is at war, in which everyone can accuse you of not being patriotic enough, or distorting or distracting people from the real problem. But still a lot of Ukrainian journalists are doing that. I think that's probably the one thing in which I think we European who live in Ukraine, or who have like a lot of contacts in Ukraine, the thing in which we can help them is help them in understanding better how to talk to the European audience. For example, in Italy, and if the problem is that the Italians are like hypnotized by Russian propaganda, there is one way to talk to them. If the problem is that they do not trust official media and they think that the official media are not different from the Kremlin media, you have to talk with them in another way.
So we are now in May of the year 2024. Can you tell us what's next for you? Will you stay in Ukraine?
Yes, I will stay in Ukraine for the foreseeable future. I have no long-term plan apart of staying here for as long as I manage to. And if I'm able to, I hope to continue to do my reporting from here. And I really hope to try understand this country even more. And especially, I really hope to be able to speak Ukrainian a little bit better than what I'm able to do now.
So maybe now we say goodbye. It's the end of this episode. Since you've been learning Ukrainian, maybe you can say goodbye in Ukrainian?
Sure. This is something that I learned. Do побачення.
Thanks a lot, Davide. Thank you for listening to this episode of Covering Ukraine with our Italian fellow Davide Maria de Luca. My name is Lepers, and I am editorial coordinator of the Europe-Ukraine desk. Lyuba Gook edited, sound designed, and mixed this episode. The views expressed by this episode guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the media they work for, nor n-ost, nor the European Commission, who funded this project. The podcast Covering Ukraine was created as part of the Europe-Ukraine desk, a program that aims at building bridges between journalists from the EU and Ukrainian journalists. You can get in touch with us at eud@n-ost.org. Maybe consider telling a friend about this show if you like it. You will hear from us soon. Take care.